Good morning. Morning, early morning. I know about half of you, I think, fairly well, so that's nice and sort of reassuring, and I'm sure I don't know something you don't know. So we wanted to start with our condition, a confession of our condition, which is that we have a syndrome, both of us do. It's called imposter syndrome. And you all have like PhDs or getting them or whatever, and we don't have nothing. We ain't got nothing. So we're just like total imposters. I just want you to know that. And I also...
Part of getting a PhD is a very strong commitment to developing imposter syndrome.
I see, yeah. That's right. So that's not the cure? I thought maybe that was... Okay, a permanent imposter syndrome. Well, I don't see ours changing, mine anyway, changing very soon. I mean, we've gotten away with so much so far, right? And then I also want to just personally confess that I am totally uncontrived this morning for our uncontrived inelegance. So John's going to go first because he did smart things.
Yeah, well, I would just like to second what Sarah says. I'm staying with Sarah, and we've been hanging out together for the last few days, and we keep thinking, oh, we ought to do something about our session. And then we came up with a few various sort of things which are really off target, but we're going to show you some of them anyway and talk about them. And somehow
Wait, I want to add one thing. The reason we're off target is about 10:30 or 11 last night, we discovered that the word song had been put in.
Yeah, that's right.
Seriously, we didn't know that this was supposed to be about songs. So I was singing all night.
Yeah, we've got a few things that aren't really songs, but anyway,
Sorry.
this thing is yeah. Is it okay? I guess we'll. Yes. Holly came up with this title, Uncontrived Elegance, and it
Yeah,
exactly. I was going to say.
We all know that now.
It's actually a hell of a title, you know, and I regretted having ever written the words down. But what this came from was the last Luminaries Conference, or whatever it was called, and I contributed some pieces from Dujom Lingpa's Tsadra, which were sheldums, basically, and one was very short. The other one was a bit longer, and it was in the context of that I wrote how Dujom Lingpa seemed to have this quality of uncontrived elegance. And I suppose that's still true. And I have got another one which is really, really sketchy. I haven't polished it at all, but we might have a look at it in a minute. But I just wanted to say a little bit about, first of all, what is uncontrived elegance in the source text? What are we talking about in the literature? And secondly, what are the problems about translating it? And that second topic is the knotty one, because I'm not sure what you can do about translating it, and we can discuss that later. There's different things that you can say about it, and it really depends who you're translating for, I think. But trying to look at uncontrived elegance in the source text, whatever it might be, and we're talking about such a huge range of literature, and it seems to me that one of the ways that uncontrived elegance is kind of likely to be something that we're looking at is, especially when we're talking about basically orally composed literature, if you like, if that's not a paradox. When I was talking about uncontrived elegance in the introduction to those Dujom Lingpa pieces, it was in the context of describing how Dujom Lingpa composed, which was actually, he would have apparently several scribes sitting down somewhere, and he would be wandering around. He did it walking, and he would have his huge boots and this impressive-looking gear that he had, and his huge beard and fierce voice, and he would shout out these poems, these pieces of advice, and he would even be doing several at the same time, and different scribes would be writing different ones, and I would love to be able to witness that. It must have been amazing, really. And I think he not only shouted them out and sort of in this theatrical, incredible way, but he also sang them. And I was really lucky for that process of translation. I asked Pema Wangyo Rinpoche for the lung for the two poems that I translated. And he kindly gave that to me, but part of it, he actually sang them in this incredible kind of, I don't know if it's exactly the same dung, that Dujom Lingpa would have used, but something very similar, from the same tradition. And I absolutely couldn't try to reproduce it, but it was added a complete dimension to that poem. And to be honest, I think that the only way we're ever going to get the full impact of these things is if somehow there could be performances, and how you could do that in English, I don't know, but that's another question. One of the things we were talking about in the last few days, before perhaps we come back to Dujom Lingpa, was sort of just more broadly, even in the canonical literature, there are certain passages which may not be songs, but they have a kind of dignity and impact that it seems important if we're talking about translation to convey in a way that may not be just sort of ordinary language. And do you want to bring up the Arahat business?
Right now? I thought you had a whole bunch of stuff first.
Well, I don't know. It's something we could...
Well, I have just an example of some English choices of translation, and then I had something for you all to translate. I thought that just one line. And then you could pass it up if you all have your little Tsadra pads. And we could, I don't know, have a clap-o-meter and see which one everybody likes. But I thought you were going to talk about real good, serious things first.
Well, I don't know.
Because I was really taken aback by this word song appearing. Is that what you're all expecting, is to talk about song, or was it verse, poetry? Okay. Because I dug up some song, John reminded me, it must have been about 11:30. I said, I don't translate songs. And he goes, sure. So that and I literally had not thought of that. And that was like pretty bad. But I mean,
well, it's too obvious for you.
Does that sound fun to kind of?
Yeah, well,
let's
have a look at this
first, because I mean that's truly uncontrived elegance, which my my cynical opinion is that translation is not uncontrived. I mean, I just don't think it's uncontrived, and then we're very lucky if it's elegant. After a lot of contriving, it might be elegant, but Dujom Lingpa is like the real deal.
Well, yes, but very difficult to do in English, and I want to come to that. But I'd like to start with some pieces from Shabkar, which are again, it's this oral thing. I don't know if anybody knows exactly how Shabkar composed, but he probably didn't sit there with his laptop, kind of improving the rhythm and things of his songs. I imagine it was something much more spontaneous, and how we came to have them recorded in writing is to me a very interesting question. Who wrote them down, who was there actually. He must have written them down, I guess. It sounds from most of the narrative in the Namtar that he was pretty much on his own, but maybe there was somebody kind of taking notes. You know, I don't know if anybody knows more about that. I don't. I'm not a Shabkar sort of expert.
Well, I studied Shabkar a lot.
Did you? Great. Great.
Generally it seems he's interesting in that, unlike Milarepa, he seems to have kept written records of his songs, and he liked to send them around to people, which is nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know anything about the Tibetans.
No. Well, it would be interesting to know how he came to.
Did he call them songs? I'm really curious about
He
that.
calls them lu most of the time.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Or-
Yeah.
Oops.
Okay.
Well, here I have, if I can find it. Two pieces. They're only extracts, but I think they're interesting. Just obviously, if we look at a whole song, it's kind of too long. But this is a piece that comes from a song where he's, I think he's in Machen. The chapter's called "Meditating on Mount Machen," and he sees this pair of ducks, a duck and a drake, coming down onto a lake, and he kind of gets to know them a little bit over the days, and then one day an eagle comes down and kills one of them, and he feels this is obviously very sad. It's a very sad song, and then he sort of turns it at the end into impermanence, a reflection on impermanence and how this is the nature of things, and that these animals were in some sense his kind of teachers of impermanence. So this is a very, how can I show you the Tibetan and I think actually, is this side, that's a bit small, is it?
Yes.
I just think I have this other section. Sorry about the disorganization. If we can see the translation side by side with the. So this is the translation from the book, The Songs of Shabkar, translated by Mathieu Ricard and friends. And here is the Tibetan, which I'll try and enlarge a bit. Oh, sorry, wrong program. Is that easier to see? So it starts where the arrow is. So, now we've lost this. Sorry, my trackpad is really stiff this morning. I don't know why.
Bring your new mouse.
No, that's right. I left it behind. Here we go. So, I mean, this is a nice, I think it's a nice translation. I'm sure it could be improved. But it's kind of, if you're talking about producing a translation, when the original is obviously fairly uncontrived elegance, then this kind of stuff isn't too difficult. It's quite graphic, and you don't have to worry about whether you're missing some incredibly important doctrinal point. I mean, maybe Shabkar had some incredibly subtle metaphor going on here, but I couldn't really see it when I looked at this poem. I think it's fairly straight stuff, and it's a kind of nature poem turning into a reflection on impermanence. So it's nice, and there are these images, I love this line, your beaks and feet were black as bees. It sounds really good in English. I've never seen a black bee, but I guess there are such things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there
Oh,
are.
we have them here.
Oh, yes?
Mhm.
Oh, well, maybe I'm just in the wrong country. And has anybody seen black bees in Tibet? I guess.
They're called,
Anyway.
they're not favored because they don't make honey.
No. Oh, I see. Good. Well, that's...
I don't think it's relevant.
So, yes, Emma, marvelous and wonderful birds from your bodies of precious gold, wings of white conch and turquoise opened. Your beaks and feet were black as bees, and your webbed toes were like a lattice. Garlands of beryl were draped around the vase of your jeweled necks. Duck and drake, you were a pair. And, you can see the rest of the translation in the book, but I put this in as an example of the kind of thing which is not, it should be possible to do a nice translation like this, and one could work on it and get it more and more poetic. A poetic translator would be able to make something very nice out of this. The second piece I wanted to show is, I think, interesting if we're talking about, literature and the different forms. This is a piece. I'll try and, I got it on my iPad.
Without my laser.
To give you the context, this is a piece which is quite fun. Shabkar had a dream, or a vision, let's say, and I'll read you what it says in the sort of introduction to this piece, if I can find it. No, that's right, it was in my photos. One day, through the connection that had been created by these prayers, while resting evenly in the true nature of mind, I had a vision. I saw the Buddha surrounded by all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and by many sages and accomplished great beings of India and Tibet. They were all smiling and laughing. From their hearts emanated rays of light that concentrated on one point and turned into a great victory banner, which was put into my hands. The day following this vision, I sang this song, The Laughter of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And then he launches into this song, which is, I have to make this tiny bit smaller so you can see it properly. Is that visible? So here we've got these, he's using these syllables. O, zatsang tama, drelnyam, au, tsenden lama, tselna. I don't know how to read them exactly, and I think it would be great. We could try further, but I get this wonderful image of maybe the translation of the introduction doesn't go far enough, but it's a little bit like the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas were kind of rolling around, laughing and splitting their sides. That's what you get from these syllables. To me, I don't know about how you. And it's a wonderful image, and the strange thing is that, especially at the beginning of this prayer, or song rather, he's talking about rather miserable things, like impermanence and, the precious human life so quickly running out and all of these things. And yet, here are the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas kind of saying, ha, ha, rolling around. So how do we... So this would be something more difficult to do really elegantly. And I think the translation in the book is moderately successful. They've decided to put the syllables at the end of the line, the sort of laughter syllables at the end of the line, and they've chosen not to use, ha ha, which is too I don't know, overused for us, isn't it? I don't know how you.
Oi.
Yes. So, and then there's this wonderful, ya yi, ya yi, ya yi. They've actually got it 3 times, whereas the text only has it sort of twice. So, you know, this is I think a sort of interesting example of a song where there's a lot going on, rather hard to translate, but it's certainly, you know, very much to be appreciated in its original. And actually, as you'll see if you look at the Shabkar Namtar, he actually goes on and composes in the same vein with all of these laughter syllables. There are 3 or 4 songs on where, first of all, it's the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas having a good laugh, and then it's, I think, Manjushri, and then it's I can't remember, you know, but this is sort of a substantial part of this whole chapter, and covers a whole lot of subjects with, you know, a couple of lines, and then a lot of uproarious laughter from the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas or whatever concerned. So it's kind of interesting. And a translation has already been done. I certainly wouldn't attempt another one right now. And then to get to the, you know, briefly to the sort of final example, which I think is illustrative of the difficulties, is to come to the Dujom Lingpa one. And this is I've done a very, very brief translation, and let me find the Tibetan because that's more interesting to look at. I had it up somewhere. Sorry about this, I should be more organized. I've lost it.
While you look, I'm going to say
Yeah,
something.
please
I'm
fill
just going to
in.
mention, like on that last one, how you might, trying to translate something that really is uncontrived and spontaneous, you might just have to, I think Woolston said this last night, you know, you might just have to admit that you're just creating something new. You know, just because you're not going to, I think, capture it just as it is. If you really want someone to get it just as it is, tell them to learn Tibetan. You know, because it would just be weird. It would be stilted and weird to try and do it literally, and then if you take too many liberties, it's not the same thing, which is okay. It's a whole new creation. It's okay. And then if you're a really good poet, you should just give up translation and write. I mean, I'm serious.
But how uncontrived do you think this is? Because I mean, it's so.
Good
I mean,
question.
it's so. Hey. I mean, it's like it's not exactly.
You think it's formulaic?
Well, I mean, it reminds me of like the
Kavya.
Zongden and the Kavya,
Yeah.
right? The in the 3rd chapter of the Shakta Alankara, the pairing one. But it's not, because it is more onomatopoeia, like just the sound. But like it's such a, I don't know. I mean, like, and then looking back at the other one and seeing the Sanskrit in it, like, and then and then thinking, wait, Shabkar in Sanskrit? I somehow, like, why did he put Baidura, in for the barrow, right? Like, instead of, just.
Is there another name for it?
Well,
Well-
I'm sure there's like a Tibetan word that he could use for it, or something, a simpler term, right, than the Sanskrit, or use the Sanskrit.
I mean, most
Viduri is really, really common.
it's one of the few things that are really they don't seem to have ever had a word for it, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
or, I don't know, something else, but
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't think of Shabkar, because I haven't read a lot of Shabkar like that, so I was very surprised to see like these kind of, like more, I don't know, a little bit more, I don't know, literary, I hate using that term in some ways, but
Yes.
more like formulaic than I had expected. Like,
Yes.
I agree. I mean, you can't tell, but, it might take a lot of contrivance to write a good poem.
well, that's why I think this whole topic of uncontrived is actually it's a bit dodgy.
But the question is, what do we mean by uncontrived?
Exactly,
So if uncontrived means that it was spontaneously sung, that doesn't mean you're not drawing on convention, right? You can't get away from genre conventions or stylistic conventions. So there might be something really pleasurable with a particular melody of ending with two
Yeah.
exclamatory syllables. And so that doesn't mean that somebody couldn't make that up on the spot, just like spoken word has certain conventions, and yet there are people who are able to spontaneously compose. And then there's the question of uncontrived, of what is it pointing to? And I think with digital thing, we'll see that more.
Well, I think the other interesting thing I wanted to bring in is this whole thing about inspiration, and of course, pratibhana, poppa, this whole idea that actually people, possibly certainly in the Buddhist tradition and maybe in other traditions too, there's a kind of sense that you can, under certain conditions, actually come up with speech which is incredibly expressive and even elegant, and uncontrived, in the sense that it kind of comes out ready-made. I mean, this is the Heart Sutra, isn't it? Chenrezig is inspired by
Yeah, he had help.
the presence of the Buddha, and he just comes up with it. Yeah.
It's not fair.
And I was told that, although in fact these Dujom Lingpa pieces are the only, this volume of there's a whole volume of these songs, and it's the only one in the Tertia which is not specifically designated as being Terma, but Penwangya Rinpoche said that actually he thinks it's all, whatever Dujom Lingpa said or wrote was kind of Terma. It's not that different. It was definitely sort of pratibhana. He was inspired and he spoke these poems. And so, although some of them are very sophisticated in their language and structure, they, in some sense, they probably are uncontrived in a real sense. And I don't know, how many other kinds of, we hear of Tertans actually, of course, having to write out the termas, having rediscovered them, and what that process involved. Again, this has been.
Translate them.
Yes, well, exactly. They put them into some kind of form, and you can see that there's some influence of who the Tertan is in the style that they bring out. So, it's complex, and I don't know exactly what the process was in each case.
What Holly and Nicole were saying too is actually the form that they're probably read a lot of it. And then that makes it easier to be spontaneous with coming out with something. Like, think of rap wars, rap battles. You have the beat, so once you have the beat going, then those words just come out. I mean, they're really remarkable if you've ever seen them. I don't know how they rhyming and the whole business. But I think the beat gives it a structure. And then, that kind of common, whatever it is, 7, 9 syllables, 12 syllables, it gives it a kind of a beat that they then can be spontaneous within.
Well, have a look at this one, because this is very interesting for its meter. Oh, sorry. What
Just
happened?
can't win.
I don't know. It's not very easy to see. I'm sorry. I don't have this in the input. Make it as big as I can. But I'll make a very clumsy attempt to read you the rhythm. The first 4 lines are the kind of introduction, if you like. So they've got a straight, Jinang, Sangwe, Kuenchok, Sum, etc. rhythm. So that's fairly straight. But then for the rest of it, it's Ai Shiyin Kyabde Longchen Ki Cheku Tredel Namta Sumden Ki Ngangne Kudang Yeshe Rangjung Ki Danyi. So it goes on this kind of lilting rhythm, which I would have to look it up to see what it's technically called, but and Dujom Lingpa does this quite a lot in his songs. In some of the longer ones, he changes rhythm in the course of the song, when he's kind of changing the theme a little bit. And it's very interesting that it has this, it kind of has again, partly because it's probably a song and it actually has a tune and can be chanted in a particular way. But it has that, even if you read it just as just reading it, it has a kind of momentum that sort of carries on and gives you some sense of a kind of continuity or being sort of carried along by the sense and by actually what he's talking about. But how do you translate it? And this is, I think this is really difficult, because you have to choose what if you're going to really present the meaning. This is full of, I wouldn't want to mess with it. You can't really stand back and paraphrase it like you can with ducks on the lake. This is about the interplay between the Xiying and the Longchen and the Tsadra and all the rest of it, and how they work. So and everybody has, you have to stick to a fairly precise terminology, otherwise nobody would really know what you're talking about. So I mean, as I say, I've done a sort of very draft translation, and I would like to continue trying to improve that. But it's just to give you a sort of taste, something like, the domain of the ground, Dharmakaya of the vast expanse, permeating everywhere, in whose unelaborated continuum endowed with the three doors of liberation it dwells, etc. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, because just to say that, I can't make a spontaneous, poetic, uncontrived translation of this beautiful text, because it would be, it just wouldn't represent the meaning in any way. So you have to, all best I can do is to try to make it hang together, give it some kind of syntax that I probably haven't got yet properly, and so that people can understand. That's all. And then to appreciate it as literature, you'd have to read it with the with the Tibetan, if you could.
I think this brings up the question as well of what sounds poetic in the target language may be different from what's poetic in the basic language. So that, for example, repetition in English doesn't sound that poetic after a while, and as well as the steady beats can get to sound a little bit like a sewing machine going along or something. So then I think you have to take choices.
I love you, yeah. It does get repetitive.
But it's so, you can never forget it.
Yes, it's a beat. Yeah.
I just wonder what would happen if you kept, you're not going to be able to do this in 9 syllables a line, of course, right? But could you could you approximate in the English? Could you make up a new meter that you commit to that might carry something that, I don't know if it's, I guess I don't know if it's true that, and even repetition, I think repetition is so interesting, and we avoid it so strongly. And it's actually, I find it quite powerful in English. And so I don't know, I just am interested in experimenting with, we have those presumptions, I share those presumptions, but I wonder too, like, what would we find if we just sort of committed to certain kinds of exercises? Like, you might, I don't know what it would be, what number of syllables per line you'd have to commit to get the meaning that you want in this in English, but what if you committed to a certain
59.
No, I don't know, but it's like, part of the thing about Uncontrived, I think, is that, as you've already said, there's like the question of what kind of learning is behind it, what kind of aesthetic exposure is behind it, and that leads to the possibility of it being more spontaneous. But I was going to say uncontrived is an interesting word, because the opposite of uncontrived is negative. Contrived, we all have a problem with contrived. We know we don't want that,
Right.
to some extent.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of resisting, I think we're resistant to some of the possibilities of doing something that might play more with some of these other strengths of the Tibetan, like the meter or repetition, because it seems contrived, or we're pretty sure that it's I'm just
I-
curious whether it might work.
Can I say, I mean, just to play the devil's advocate as usual, I think the idea of uncontrived and spontaneous in association with poetry and art in general is a very recent concept, and we have it. We think that, artists that are spontaneous and creative and intuitive and all those things, I think that is not applicable. And I think we're like, it's kind of apples and oranges. Like art means artifice, artful. The opposite is, artless. That's spontaneous. To be artless is spontaneous. And so we're imposing this idea that just bursting forth with your emotions is somehow this art of poetry, and I don't think it applies. I think there's a lot of contrivance, to make good poetry, even in English. They don't, except for a very few, mostly they really work hard. The word, will not stay in place, will not, as T.S. Eliot says, it's super contrived.
I
That's
suppose
the
the-
art in my, in my
I suppose the
Soul and craft.
opposite would be highly crafted, or something like that. Crafted elegance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is valid.
in my craft and soul and art.
That's
Yeah.
what the poets say at IU. We have a big poet, at ODU, we have like this big poet group, like the poet laureate of Virginia is at ODU, and he comes and gives talks and stuff. And they always talk about it as a craft, it's the
Yeah.
craft of poetry, like that's the
Yeah.
word they use. But they practice like iambic, like I sat in on their classes, and they practice, like they sit there and they count the syllables and they look at, is it dactylic, is it this, I mean, I
Wow.
went through all of
Yeah.
that and I tried to keep up, but man, it's like harder than Tibetan and stuff.
Yeah.
It's really hard, but they do practice that craft, like that rhythm and stuff, so I mean, I don't know, maybe we can try to do something with that. I think it's really hard though to put it in iambic, or to do something like take a form that's in English, that's a really common form, and then play with that, like, it's, I don't know.
Well, I was just thinking about Shaukar in particular, like what you were saying, we don't really know who wrote it down. And it seems like in the Tibetan especially, there's certain advantages to being identified as gur, or as being uncontrived and spontaneous, as
Yeah.
opposed to nena, like a kind of a lineage concern, or like these are coming from biographies mostly, so it helps to identify who this person is, the fact that they were singing uncontrived songs. Whether or not they were actually written or contrived or thought about or spontaneous, we don't really know, but there's like a aspect of connection to a whole other realm of Tibetan Buddhism that comes with that.
Yeah. It's actually, as you say, it's a genre,
It's a genre, yeah.
and in a way, an author could deliberately insert himself or herself into that genre.
Just by calling it gur as opposed
Yeah.
to something else.
Yeah.
I got really into thinking about exactly something like, well, what are they calling it?
Yeah.
So much of it is poetry, but if they don't actually say gur or lu or something, then is someone actually singing it? And then something like, well, Olive Chut, for instance, they don't say they sang it, they said it. And later on they put it to some kind of music. Liturgy becomes chanting. Well, how many are actually, other than Milarepa, they actually, they actually really, it's hard to know unless it's very, specified, I think. So I think you have to think about that too. And then you have to think about, when you translate it, is someone going to be singing it? Are you singing it when you're reading anthologies of songs, even if they were sung before? And so really the only thing that's been singing is liturgy anymore, really. What are you doing with the translation? Does it have to be song? Because, just because it's called song, when you translate it, is it going to be a song? Are you all going to get together and sing it, in English? Yes, Kempo Tsolsum did that, but, we know how that turned out. No, I'm just kidding. But, maybe. But then you have to, I think you have to decide, before you can restrict your form that you translate it into, you have to decide what's going to happen to it. You know, who's going to use it and where is it going to be done.
But even in English, the sonic part of poetry is always there, even if you just read it silently in your mind, right? I mean, the sound of poetry is...
Well, I have an example of that I did bring, but...
I also just want to return to what Rachel said about Shakar, what we do know, right? You were saying we don't know, but Rachel's research, you suggested we do know something about how we recorded that, right? So
Yeah.
there's some evidence there.
Yeah,
So
but,
we
yeah.
return to a Shakar, right?
And he's also very self-conscious about, like, each of the songs that he records, he says, men, muyan men. So he's
To
specific
pick,
that I
yeah.
sung this song. And he uses a lot, also often there's neba, like samatamara,
Mm.
so he
Set.
often uses that as a set.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
some of it first, some of it second. He's very
Interesting.
self-conscious about it.
That's interesting.
That's
It's,
fantastic. So even if we can identify a piece of literature as something that's uncontrolled or spontaneous, I think the moment we start translating it, it becomes somewhat planned out and we're
course.
reading it. So then how do we capture that as someone who is in some ways already contrived by being the reader who's attempting to translate? And to
yeah.
kind of capture that
Yeah.
feeling, it becomes really difficult. Like, never mind the meter and also
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, I think Don was talking about that. How do you
Yeah.
capture that sense and still, I mean, I feel like it's really hard. That's why I didn't think that I translated song because I'm not, I don't really know. I try and keep it readable, smooth, flowing, only that is like maybe the best you can do. Particularly what John was talking about when there's these technical terms in there, you can't make it into a song. You have to have some reference to the meaning, but you can make it, a good read, or that maybe the best you can do in some cases, I think, by good English, simply, or whatever language you're translating into, just to make it so that the reader isn't struggling with trying to figure out what the heck is this about, or trying to imitate the, 59 lines in one sentence Tibetan, which is not the style now. Journalistic style has become because of the influence of journalism, it's short sentences, which makes it easier and more pleasant, really, I think. But I don't know, that's
But
all I
it's
have.
interesting too because this has this sort of heavy doctrinal content, which is important to get across. But at the same time, if somebody wants to know what the view of Dzogchen is, or some part of Dzogchen, this isn't where you'd look. Actually, you look at the song because it's a song of Dujom Lingpa, and because you think it's interesting as a song or as a poem, And so there's a slight paradox in what we're trying to do, translating it so precisely, and the fact that this it's not really the source of information on that particular subject that it's not a kind of reference text in any way. So I'm stuck on that one. I don't know what to do except say that it's nice to have a translation of it, and it's something quite short that can inspire you and remind you of the view kind of thing. But
Should we go on and try it? Should we do some translation? I mean, go ahead and finish, but I'm just wondering if it's time to.
Yeah, I think Rachel had a point.
Yeah,
I had a
Rachel.
point
It's
as
actually
well.
related to both Sarah
Yeah.
and John. So basically, you made the point about readability and so forth, and John's making a point about meaning. I'm wondering if we need more collaboration between, because we're trained as translators or academics who study Tibetan, and so
Right.
forth, but none of us, or some of us, are trained as, very few of us are trained as poets. So I was
Yeah.
wondering if we think of translation as one person translating something, but maybe we need a Tibetanist and then a poet and maybe someone who's meditated before. To come together.
That should be the new requirement, John, for the, 84,000 groups. Forget Sanskrit, somebody's meditated.
And I think another related point is I'm teaching a class right now, Buddhist literature in Tibet, and the undergrads that don't have a Buddhist background, they actually they can't understand the English.
Yes.
And so I'm thinking
So
about,
true.
somebody like Dujum Lingpa and to female disciples. I've now translated those, and like,
Great.
yeah, if you use Sanskrit, you're signaling something for the practitioner so that you're not inventing your own term. But then for the people who aren't already steeped in this world, well, maybe they shouldn't be reading songs about Dzogchen or understanding them. But it sort of alienates it from its Tibetan context.
Yeah.
And Dujin Lingpa does signal, not here, but in many of his colophons, he does say these are the ravings of a madman, or he'll use some signal to gesture to that spontaneity. So it's not our imposition. It's actually he's gesturing to that sort of sense of this just coming out as it comes out. Of course, it is inspired.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's just a lot of questions of could we use more kind of simple and yet technical. It's almost like we have to craft new translations of specific terms that are 2 syllables and yet are signaling these, concepts like Churchill that, unfabricated. That's a lot of syllables,
Yeah.
Could we come up with something, that's
More snappy. Yeah.
Short.
snappy.
Keeping it short, that's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Snappy and evocative.
Do you actually believe that when when they say, "Oh, this just popped up"? I always figured they were just covering their bases.
Yeah.
In case this doesn't match Kavya, blah blah blah, then I just kind of
It's an important rhetoric.
yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
that this ties into what Professor Willett was saying earlier, that the ability to be spontaneous and to have that kind of elegance is only attained through incredible discipline.
Yeah.
Like an incredible violinist, no
Right.
one that hasn't practiced the
Yeah.
violin for 200,000 hours or whatever is going to be able to pick up a violin and make spontaneous
Yeah,
forms.
sure.
Yeah.
It's going to
Yeah.
take a lot of mastery.
We could
Yeah.
ask Miguel, can you do a spontaneous jazz without
That's
training?
exactly the metaphor we were talking about last night for this
Yeah, you
stuff.
can't, right?
Well, it doesn't even apply anymore once one has spent as much time,
Yeah.
that much
He's
time.
a great
with
bass
one's
player.
instrument. You were talking about rappers, actually, which is I
Yeah.
think a great example
It's
for
an
me. That's the
amazing
best
art form.
analog, the closest analog for me for starting to think about what some of these authors were maybe doing.
As a musician, yeah.
Yeah, just like like a freestyle battle, for instance, what these guys
Right.
come up with these days is absolutely
Unbelievable, I know.
remarkable.
Yeah.
But they've been doing this for a long time.
That's
There's
right.
there are hours and hours of listening. You mentioned reading as a
Mhm.
prerequisite for producing good writing.
Mhm.
I think these people have been listening and also working at their craft for hundreds of hours. So when they're up on stage in its battle time, they're drawing on a vast background of experience and craft of various sorts.
Yeah.
I think an interesting counterpoint to this, though, is with Dujin Lingpa. If you look at his Namtar, I mean, he has these songs that he's singing when he's like 9 years old, 11 years old, and he's singing these beautiful songs on the nature mind.
He might have had help too.
Yes. Yes, he was kind of born with the necessary background, So it's just he just has to express it in some way. But even so, it is kind of incredible that he had this skill in composition. You could have that realization, understanding of the view, without necessarily being very well literate. I suppose is really is what it is, isn't it? And it's funny that the two go together.
3 minutes.
Oh.
33. Okay. The other thing, talking about translation and choosing forms in which won't be the same, but which may be sort of our equivalent that would be a sort of suitable vehicle for this kind of literature. Again, one of the huge problems is that for us now in the 21st century, kind of seeing things in metered verse has almost become archaic, and and it looks funny and unsuitable. And I've seen somebody did a really good translation of, I think it's the 37 practices of a bodhisattva. Somebody in Dharamsala, and then there was a long time ago, and then there was this thing called the Wheel of Sharp Weapons. Does anybody remember that? And it's this kind of da 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 da, and it's kind of like jolly hockey songs, you know. And the sons of the Buddhas all act in this way, kind of, you know. And it's kind of, it has this sort of Boy Scout atmosphere about it. And it's a pity because it's well done and, you know, difficult to do, and somebody's done a good job of crafting it, but it misses the, I suppose, register would be the word. It doesn't convey the same thing for us now, you know. And Sarah was talking about this the other day, you know, that sometimes when people try to translate sadhanas into something that which is important, that we find a way of chanting and practicing, you know, in English. But if we get too sort of preciously poetic, and English is quite difficult, and you have to sort of shorten syllables. Like what was that thing about the Chenrezig sadhana?
Chenrezig with the antelope skin or shoulder draped.
Yes.
Very contrived. Nothing worse than bad poetry, right? I think it's better just not to try. I mean, I really do. It's like, oh my God, no.
I think everyone assumes it's going to come out like doggerel, and so they're afraid of coming across as a buffoon, and so they don't even give it a chance.
Yeah.
And I think there should be more attempt to do it, and you know, a lot of failure in the process. But I don't know. I mean, I know that, you know, this Dangchu Central Rinpoche, you know, the precious supreme Bodhi mind may where unborn arise, never born, never decline, but decrease forevermore. You know, this sticks in my head, in part because, you know, it's in the same meter as the Tibetan.
Yeah.
We did do a whole book that Graham Woodhouse, this British monk, translated the phrase to Tibetan arising in a strict meter, because he says part of the tradition is a chanted tradition, you know, and this is part of the meaningful context of this work is its use as a chanted text.
Well, memory, as you brought up, David, is very important, isn't it? The fact that these things have a meter makes them so much easier to remember and to stay in the mind. And you know,
I think in the Western tradition we have a lot of different stuff to draw on. Like recently I was just looking at like the Gregorian chants and recto tunnel.
Yeah,
I don't understand any of it, but I think there's a lot to draw on.
that's a really good
perhaps
point.
as Buddhists we're a little bit hesitant to draw from our Western tradition.
Right. Yeah, good point, yeah. I mean, and I think was it Anne or Janet, I can't remember who said it, but a lot of reading and a lot of exposure. We didn't need to invent the wheel. It's good, really good. That would be a really interesting thing to look at if people are chanting. Well, speaking of that kind of thing, maybe we could look at this. Yeah, okay, sorry. Thought mumbling is part of the chanting process. I was the one, you've all heard this. It's like the really famous kind of line. It's been really bugging me lately. I've kind of gone down the rabbit hole about this, you know, what arhants become, arhants, and they say this phrase. And I always remembered it as, you know, done is what had to be done, lived is the good life. And so it's in many sutras. And so I wanted to just kind of look at a couple of translations, but it came up for me because someone said, well, what's it like being retired? Because I recently retired from Naropa, and it's like, you know, I went on and on and on and on, but what came to mind is this old Pali, probably Rhys Davis or somebody translating it in this kind of hokey, contrived way, but that's what's in my mind because you know, after I tried to explain that really you don't have to do something anymore. When you're retired, you could just be and blah, 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 blah. And I could have just said, done is what has to be done, lived is the holy life, you know. But so, so here's a couple translations of, there's interesting, so I've been hung up on this like for about a month since the Tibetan intensive, but we don't need to go into all the problems of it. Look how simple it is in Tibetan. But anyway, these are sort of some of the older, from either Sanskrit or Pali translations here. And then that one up there is someone from 84,000, recent translation. And I just wonder what you think, the sense of a difference between what's going on of this very famous, and it's not, by the way, always the same in Sanskrit and Pali. They have little differences, just little ones, but there's a lot of possibilities, and some of the problems I see with all three of them I'm not going to go into. But just the tone, do you see anything different, like, say, from the first one as opposed to the second two?
Personal pronoun.
Yeah. Then now what does that do? What do you think? How does that affect you?
In English, it's always more accessible when there's a personal pronoun there, I think. Like, unless it's
Okay.
an idea, but like when you're talking about like,
Right.
Duck is pretty strong, I feel like.
Well, is this something that the Arahant is going to remember, to have that personal kind of, well, now I have finished everything I'm going to do, and I think I'm out of here now, or is it, or is it the kind of hokey translation is a little bit more like formulaic in the sense of old style poetry, but this is a formula. It's always basically in quotes, Sheijawa, and it happens apparently to all Arahants and retired professors. And and so it sort of comes out as, and it's always the same. Isn't it interesting that it is often, I mean, it's a little different, but it's roughly the same. It's not each individual Arahant saying it in their own personal way. Somehow it's something that comes up. Anybody else have opinion? Well, yeah, which I don't consider even a pronoun. Wrong is a pronoun, and da is like a self. But yes, my lives have been exhausted. Is it?
Yeah.
Did you find it in Tibetan as nge? Oh, that makes a big difference, I think. So then the question is to continue the pronoun throughout or not. And Jawa Jepa, isn't that interesting? Not past tense. I find that, like, I don't even know what to go with that. But why did they choose not to put it in past tense? Huh? Chupa che. Yeah. But the Jawa. Oh, this one is in past tense. Sorry. Most of the ones we saw, that I saw in Tibetan, were not. They were jading che ta che. So that was kind of interesting.
It's
The
like-
deeds done, deeds doing.
When you translate it, it deserves something a little bit formalized, doesn't it? It's like, till death us do part. Or something like that. You sort of come up with something a little bit
Which-
even archaic to signal
Yeah.
the importance of the
Yeah.
occasion. This is a big
It's
deal.
ritualistic even, and not something that you just say,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'll stick around.
Yeah.
So context of how it's being used could depend on how you, if this just came along in a conversation, I would definitely have it be like, I have done this and that and stuff. So you really have to look at a context.
I would go less literal. Can I try it?
Sure.
My lives are over. I've lived the holy life. Done is what needs to be done. No more lives after this one.
Yeah, that's very nice too. Well, we have one for you that isn't, we're not going to show any translations. It's only one line. You want to try it? I'm working on it now. It's like the shortest thing we could possibly find there. It's from write it down, and if you want, we can do it anonymously. It's from the 6 Yogas of Niguma. It's in the illusory body.
Can I just say something about the previous one?
Yeah.
So like that comes up in the Pali suttas so
Sure.
often, like,
Over
again,
and
the
over.
same text.
Uh-huh.
And it's pretty much exactly the same.
Right.
thing,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think there has to be a connection made because a really obvious reference to like
The-
suttas.
Oh, definitely. Of course, that is sutras. Yeah, yeah.
Over and over again.
Over and over in the same sutra, Pali sutra, Sanskrit, so all, right? If you look it up, if you put it into, the search thing, you get like 10 sutras, So yeah, at least, maybe more. So apparently they all say the same thing when they retire. We're like, woohoo. But
Can you give any context for this?
yeah,
Just
it's
like a
the
little- Other than that.
six
Like, what
yogas.
is coming?
Okay, all right, I am going to secretly give you the secret. This is something you say to yourself to remind yourself of illusory body. It's the illusory of the 6 yogas of Naguma, or this, not yogas, sorry, bad me. 6 dharmas of Naguma. See, that's like Evans Wentz influence. But yeah, the 6 dharmas of Naguma, the practice of illusory body, you're always like reminding yourself. So it's something that you don't want to have to say a whole big long thing. It's catchy, right? I figured you all knew those words. But it's still not easy to translate. Yeah. I think that the knee is the biggest problem in English that we have in all of Tibetan that we fail at. You ready? People still working on it? Okay. No, you can't have choices. No forward slash. I want your final manuscript. Too late to make changes, right, David? That's like going to cost money if you're going to. And obviously no Sanskrit. Shall I go around and collect? Or if you don't want to, if you don't mind being anonymous, it might be better to be anonymous, I don't know. So that we can all hear it with equal. So someone with your beautiful English accent, do you want to be the reader?
Not particularly.
Oh, okay. Well, we could find a reader.
I mean, it's not even.
There's not a lot there.
There's nothing.
The market filter and then
Does anyone? Joshua, do you want to read them? Sure. Yeah. Come on, I'm just tired of talking. For a change. I need to stand up anyway.
Should we applaud right after?
No, let's hear them all and then kind of get a response, okay? Do you think, or do you want to applaud?
Yeah, I'll hear them all.
Hear them all, yeah. That's what I thought too.
Appear, appear, real, unreal. Yes, it appears. No, it's not real. Here, here, existence, non-existence. Appearances are appearances. Truths are not truths. It appears, but it's not real. Appearance, just that. Truth, what is that? Appearances may appear, yet true they are not. Yoda. Appearing, appearing, truth untrue. Appearance appears, true but not real.
No plagiarizing for the late one.
Oh, this one did a cool thing with the space of the page. Appearances appear, truths are not true. It's sort of like a...
Concrete poetry.
Yeah. This appearance appears, this truth not the truth.
Oh.
What appears is an appearance, is just, in brackets, is just an appearance. What is true is not true. Appearances appear, appearing as truthful, they are real. They're,
You're asking me, I don't even have my glasses on.
do you, I can't tell what that is.
They're real, I suppose.
Real. Okay.
I suppose, yeah.
Appearing as truthful, they are real. Yeah, okay. Appearances are so. Truth, or appearances are so. True, they are not.
Another Yoda.
Form is appearance. Reality is not the truth.
Oh, that's brave.
There's a huge range there.
There's a huge range, yeah.
And many of them are really good. You know,
Yeah.
that's the thing. So many choices that work, kind of. Yeah. So I don't know. Did anything stand out for you? Now? If I handed them back, would you change your translation? Oh, how would you change it?
Simpler.
Yeah.
I really like the really simple ones that were
Like the
almost
first.
as few words as this.
Yeah.
That was good.
Form is.
Well,
Yeah.
there were some that had the same number of syllables, right? That not just had
Appear.
syllables and then five
Appearing. Appearance appears.
Yeah, same number of words.
Truth does not, I kind of like for real, well, you know, like real is unreal.
Which is the one, there are two, I think two did this almost the same thing, where there's one that's a 3-syllable line and a 5-syllable line.
Yeah, do you really think that matters?
I'm
D-
just wondering, that's
oh.
a kind of contrivance that I
Yeah.
wonder whether it might help us.
The very simplest one was appear, appear, real, unreal.
No, but I mean the one that's more naturalistic, it's sort of like it is,
Appear it does, true it is not.
no, a really natural one.
Yes, it appears, no, it's not real. There, here, existence, non-existence. That's quite interpretive. Appearances are appearances. Truths are not truths. Truths are not truths. Truths lie. Appearance just that. Truth, what is that? So what is that? So, I mean, that's imposing a question where there isn't, well, one could, actually I think John, when you first tried it, when I read it to him, he made it into questions. Right? Is it true? Well, didn't you? Is appearance real? No. Is
Does it appear yes? Is it true?
to know? Yeah.
I did that one.
Did you do that?
And I was trying to, because I think it's, behind it's asking a question of you, I
That's
thought.
right.
So, that's
Yeah.
why I put it in
I
there.
mean, and that is one way to kind of interpret ni, like in a way. It's like you ask yourself this rhetorical question, and then you answer it because you already know, But, or you don't have to do it that way. I mean, I don't have I haven't solved this, and I'm also tempted to do it differently each time it comes up, because it comes up quite a bit. Not quite a bit, but maybe 3 times, the same phrase exactly, and I get really bored really quick. So my standing translation right now is they're all a little different. But that's not too good, because you're supposed to just to settle on one that pops up in your mind like a kind of branding of appearance. You're branding it, and something's supposed to be memorable about it. So basically, you kind of like, oh, nang ni nang, den ni mi den. And, that's your response as you go around to remind yourself constantly, because the Julu kind of practice of illusion doesn't work unless you constantly apply it, really, in all circumstances, and you have to have it on the tip of your tongue. Which is why, when that phrase came up, done is what needs to be done, that's something I found in my mind. I don't read Pali Sutras all that much. In fact, I never do. But yet, there was something about that sticking in your mind that you need in certain cases.
Can I cite them again?
What?
Can I cite these colors?
Yeah, oh, sure.
We want to find the ones that you did 3 and 4.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I personally think I mean, I don't know why you'd want to stick to the syllables number. That just, I think it's not important myself. But anyway, you know, those things.
But I mean, again, I'm calling for contrivance, so you weren't being the devil's advocate to me.
Oh, okay,
I
right,
think,
right,
we
right.
should Maybe try some more.
Sure, yeah. Actually, yeah, we had the Tibetan intensive, we did a verse, the Mahamudra prayer, which is so famous, and one person did try and make translate the entire verses in 7 lines, and it was completely incomprehensible. And then she would admit it. It's not like we didn't. She figured out by the end that it was like, no, this doesn't work, because there was too much meaning in it for 7 syllables. You know, maybe something, huh?
Maybe 14.
I see. Yeah, sure, it's something rhythmic.
2 lines of 7.
Or 2 lines.
It's
And-
interesting because if you force yourself to be brief, it forces you to use the simplicity
Sure.
that they're using, you know. So
Brief, yes, but exact syllables, what
form
for?
appears, truth, it's a lie. There's something,
Yeah.
you know, I think some of the catchier ones were the ones that.
Yeah, catchy.
Yeah.
Definitely catchy. I think that's catchy sticks in our mind. That's why it's called catchy, right? It catches your mind.
I think so. The 2 that follow this were, it appears, but it's not real. That's the same one.
I wrote that one, but I was not conscious of that at all.
Good try.
Also, it appears real is not real, I think matches too, but it's not quite as nice because it doesn't flow.
But that one, I mean, it's really good, but it's also just extremely straightforward and kind of like probably how you would actually say it.
Yeah.
So maybe not as catchy. You know what I mean? Because it's just like talk.
I really like John's questions.
Yeah, I did too.
That really sticks with me.
You like the questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if it's not exactly in the Tibetan.
Yeah. Well, for my Julu practice, I'll probably say, you know, Nang ni nang.
I
Ten ni
think
ni
it,
ten.
what's missing from some of the renderings is the contrast between those 2
Yeah.
statements, isn't it? Because you have to somehow bring that out. And,
Yeah. And what I said about brave is to translate a word in 2 different ways that is that close together, like practically side by side, is interpretive, but that might be okay. You know, that might be fine. It might not work to keep the same word again. So.
One thing that really struck me as I was reading them, which isn't necessarily conveyed in spoken English, was the wide range of use of punctuation and grammar, which I think we have
Right.
huge access to in English that we don't have in Tibetan.
Absolutely.
That's one of the things that we can
Yeah,
use to really
we get the
sort of
colon going and the thing, but remember, this is something that you're saying to yourself. It's not necessarily something you're looking at written. It looks nice in a text, but you can put the punctuation in as a sort of hint on how you should say it when you're saying it to yourself, like a semicolon. We love the semicolons for those. Yeah, David.
I have a semicolon one.
Okay.
Speaking of semicolons.
Appearing semicolon, true but not true.
Yeah.
yeah.
True, but not true.
Because you got both of them are bookended. I mean, obviously you can't do appear twice and get 3 syllables, but you have the dan at the beginning and the end, and if you can, I don't know.
But that's like, it's actually interesting because it's kind of like the conventional truth and the ultimate truth. True.
It's a Gilluper reading.
Right. But, true on a relative level. But not true on an ultimate level. And that might be suitable, too, for, depending on how somebody thinks and regards phenomenal world.
This kind of brings to mind, some verses where you get repetition of the same word in the middle. That breaks our whole verse.
Yeah.
In one topic
Yeah.
means one thing, and then in the other.
Yeah, I've run across that a lot. Yeah, that's hard to, yeah.
But then they're doing it on purpose to give weight to something.
Yeah, I see that a lot of repetition with a difference, right?
Yeah.
I wonder how to do that in English.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is an interesting form. I mean, nobody went really wild with it, like, appearance is bullshit. I mean, what?
That's contrived expectation. You're like someone please.
You got it.
I got it. Is that the one you're going to remember now? Sorry, you'll never forget that. Yeah.
What's the relationship between nung and den in the text that you're reading? Like, I mean, I think these terms get used a lot, so maybe that's like
Sure.
another angle that you
Sure.
can look at it, and then you can brainstorm. Kind
Well,
of
sure, and
off
it
of-
comes
off
in a
of-
vast, huge. It's actually Taranaka has written this huge, explanation of the six dharmas of Nirguma, and goes on and on. It's not complicated though. It's the basic understanding that to regard everything as illusion, not that it is illusion, but that it's like illusion, which is so important in the Buddhist teachings. That little which my mother would have gone crazy with, because like her biggest upset of her life is that there was a commercial that said Winston tastes good like a cigarette should, and it should be as a cigarette should. but nevertheless, it's illusion-like. So it does appear, and you can't deny it, right? But it doesn't have intrinsic existence. It's just the basic Buddhist thing,
But
So,
illusion, none of us chose illusion for none. There,
yeah, right.
Like, I mean, that's another.
But it is
like,
illusion. It is the illusory body practice. So yeah,
Like,
right.
Maybe another alternative, like illusion, but it's also hard with that slur there.
Well, there's other longer things you say to yourself too in this. This is just the short ones that we didn't have a lot of time in. How many? What do we have there? We have seven syllables all together, and we got 15 different translations. And not only that, there's only how many? There's actually only 1, 2, 3 words. 3 words, not difficult words. And we got all these different translations. It's really awful, isn't it? If you're someone like, I'm a totally indecisive person, translating is like torture. I mean, that was my kind of point with this. Something even so simple makes a big difference. So.
But doesn't that also sort of underscore that the translation is contrived and also uncontrived, right? If all of us came up with such radically different things, then
They
there's
weren't.
an element of
They weren't radically different. They were all very close, which was interesting. But yeah, I think. But go ahead, finish your thought there.
if everybody came up with things that were different, right?
Yeah.
I would argue substantially different. Maybe not
Okay.
ultimately different.
Relatively.
They appear different.
But in truth, they're not true. Yeah.
Then I mean, I hate to invoke like the middle way, but there's a sort of way that it's in between contrived and uncontrived. That we can't call it necessarily contrived, because then everything would appear to be like, they would all be the same.
And neither contrived nor not contrived.
Right.
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, I think so. As you work on translation in terms of contrived and not contrived, you can go with first thought, best thought. You can kind of do that, and it may or may not work, is the thing. I mean, sometimes that's really good because it's the most natural thing, but most often you have to, mess with it, unless you're going to do a very, very creative translation, and those are good too, but I do find myself constantly looking up the Tibetan when someone has done a really creative translation to find out what it really means, So, but I don't discourage that. I just wouldn't probably publish it. But yeah, it's good to play with it. I mean, there's all kinds of things. How would you really say it? I send the students, I say, well, because they somehow can't come out with English sentences at a certain stage of their translation project, no matter what. They just can't do English. And so I say, go to a coffee shop and tell somebody what this means. What would you say this means?
Missionizing.
Yeah. Like, would you really say it that way? You wouldn't say this way that they've translated ever in their life, and yet somehow they hand in papers that are like that, So that's one way to like work on your translation is actually how would you say it first? And for you to say it, you have to understand it. For you to say it in a proper English sentence, you have to understand it. And if you can't say it in an English sentence, you don't understand it.
Another way of working with it is back translating.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah.
You take it into English, and then you say, well, how would I say this if I were translating it to Tibetan?
Yeah.
And if you come up with something completely different from that.
Yeah. The very first year I taught in Europa, Pearl Olson, who was was in my Tibetan class, and she never got too great, but her theory was if I had all these words that she had looked up in the dictionary, what would I say? And it was actually, what, anyway.
It's also the context, because
Of course.
you don't understand the context well enough, even if you have a really good grasp of the language, it's not going to come out.
Sure.
Right.
Absolutely.
Because if you think you're reading a Gelukpa figure, but he's actually an Ingva.
Yes. Oh, that's a whole nother thing where the terms are different in each school. Yeah, it's like major thing, yeah. Okay. Marcus is going like, so. Roll. Thank you, yeah.